Hey guys, it's Melissa here from melissaoatman.com. Welcome to another episode of Awaken Your Inner Awesomeness, the weekly podcast devoted to all things spirituality and self-improvement. I am so delighted you're here with me today because we have a very special guest. Today we have with us Miss Helen Gretchen Jones. She is a certified death doula, intuitive, and channeler, and she released the book entitled Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides, Bridging the Gap Between Life and the Afterlife with a Death Doula's Wisdom. And she's here today to talk to us about how to really tap more into our intuitive gifts and what she's learned from being a death doula. So I cannot wait to have this conversation today. And I want to thank you so much for being here with us today, Helen.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So I've never really met a death doula, but I think that job is so incredibly important. A little over 2 years ago, I lost my mom to pancreatic cancer, and the end stages can be a very difficult, trying time. How exactly did you get into the work of being a death doula? That's a very interesting profession.
So whenever when we're young and we're growing up, death doula wasn't really a job. It wasn't something that was around very much. I believe it has sort of evolved from our changing healthcare system over the last decade. Nurses have a lot more paperwork that they have to fill out and a lot more responsibilities with data. And I think that was taking them away from being bedside. A lot of nurses used to sit bedside. And so now there's a need for people to go in and sit with families and with patients as they're transitioning. I heard about it shortly after my dad transitioned. My dad passed away in 2015, and it was relatively unexpected. He was in his 50s, so pretty young. And there was a lot of, there was closure that still needed to happen between my dad and especially one of my sisters. And there was a lot of things that was left unsaid, and there was a lot of healing that still needed to take place. And when I learned that death doulas help initiate a lot of that closure and a lot of that healing before the dying process actually, is final, I thought, wow, I'd sure love to take part in that and help other families not have to have the same experiences that my family did around my dad's death. And so I jumped right on in.
I love that so much because I know for us personally, we knew my mom was sick. We knew that death was a possible outcome for her, but it was still shocking, and you're still never fully prepared. And I feel like most of the time we really didn't have any idea what was going on, and the medical professionals really weren't telling us what was going on and what was happening. And I feel like if we had had maybe somebody to be there during that time to help with the transition, that would have made it so much easier.
I do find that when I'm with families and patients, depending on who brought me in, there's a lot of that people don't know. Hospice is such a valuable resource in our communities, and to utilize them as soon as possible and not wait to the last minute really kind of helps people know where they're at in the dying process. But having a death doula come in and sit with patients and with family to sort of navigate that process really helps people feel like they know exactly what's going on. And, most people fear the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be where a lot of the issues kind of come up. They're fearful when they don't understand what's happening, or they feel out of control and they don't feel like they know what's going to happen next. So a death doula really does come in and help along those lines.
I think so many people are focused on, like, we don't want death to happen, right? We're doing everything in our power to save our loved ones. We don't want them to die. And I know in my mom's case, she was afraid to die because she didn't know what was going to happen to her on when that transition happened. And I think having somebody there to just support you and explain the process, and this is what might happen, this is how it's going to look. Because I know it's different for everyone, but that would have just been so much more comforting than what actually happened with us.
And especially with the patient, when we're first diagnosed, like you were saying, there's so much fear, especially in our Western civilization, our Western culture, because death is distant from us. When someone gets sick, oftentimes we, like you said, we fight whatever disease it is, and we're going to do everything in our power to keep death at bay. And when we finally realize that we can't, and that this is going to be a terminal illness, then we get angry. usually. Of course, it doesn't have to go in this order, but oftentimes. And then once we finally get to the role of acceptance, I think that's when the fear really starts to surface. At least it has with a lot of my patients, because they take time now to really recognize where they're at in the present moment and where they believe they're going to be going. And that's when the fear comes in. It is my experience so far, though, that in the last 2 weeks, and even 1 week before a person actually transitions, they start to have experiences with spirit, with angels or guides or beings of light or deceased loved ones coming to visit them. And when a family can't see it and they get nervous, like, okay, they're hallucinating or something, this is a process of shutting down. And so they sometimes medicate their loved one, instead of recognizing in that moment that this is an opportunity to listen, hear them out fully, and recognize that they've got a foot in both worlds right now. And how cool is that they're actually explaining it to you in some form. And it gives hope to the people left behind, and it definitely alleviates the fear for the patient. When we allow that to be the reality and truth for that person, and honor that they're seeing their deceased loved ones or angels or beings of light, their fear gets removed. So we can sit there and try to help them remove that fear. But the truth is, when they're having those spiritual connections, that's when the fear gets removed. So,
Yeah. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard other medical professionals say, oh, they hallucinate towards the end. But I know personally, not from my mom because she was unconscious, but with another family member, we were there towards the end, and she kept saying things like, "Oh, my mama, I'm going to see her," and then she was saying different family members' names, and my mom at that point looked at me and said, "She's seeing people coming for her," and to me, that was a comfort to know that that's what's happened. So I'm sure you witnessing this over and over, that has to be real proof to you that there is this connection to the other world as they're transitioning.
so as a death doula, I think another reason I kind of was, gravitated towards this line of work is because I do have regular interactions with the spirit world or with spirit, angels, guides. So being able to see spirit at the bedside of these patients and then have it validated with their experience as well, that's what gives me, like knowing that it's true. Because when they say something and I'm already seeing it, there's not a shadow of doubt for me anymore.
Yeah.
But it is important that to recognize not all death doulas see spirit at the bedside. But I do. And that's one of the reasons that I move in that direction. I love it.
That's so incredible that you're able to see it too, because that has to be a validation for the family. But you talk about, in this book, you're talking about bridging the gap between the life and the afterlife. So you talk about helping people to tap into their own intuitive abilities, because do you feel like anyone can do this, be able to connect with the other side, even if they're not close to transitioning to death, if they're just there with their loved ones?
Absolutely. And even if you don't even have to be there with your loved one, this can take, time and space does not matter. When you want to connect to another soul, another person on a soul level, you don't have to be right beside them ever. Whether they're in a physical body or not, none of that matters. Time and space. Time and space is what we use as a tool in our human earthly experience in order to have a beginning and an end to our experiences. Otherwise, they would just keep going, and no one wants that. We want to have an out because we'd like to exit. So we use that as a tool. So when we want to connect to someone who's alive or deceased, it doesn't really matter. Connecting to another soul on a soul level, that can happen with anyone, to anyone, and you can connect all the time. I like to tell people, this is an example that I have. I like to tell people that connecting to spirit can sometimes feel so subtle that it's as if I asked you to close your eyes and imagine the beach. And imagine the sand beneath your toes and the breeze caressing your skin and blowing through your hair. And you can probably hear the waves crashing up on shore or the cry of a seagull. And at the same time, you're aware of sitting in the chair right where you are right now. And that's what it feels like to be in two worlds at once. It's as though they're both happening at the same time. It's like it's an overlay of information. The more you practice this, the more you practice connecting to someone else, the stronger and stronger that image of the beach or that connection to spirit becomes. It becomes more intense. I think it becomes more intense because as you start to connect, you're connecting to your higher self, you're connecting to your team and spirit, and that entity, those entities, and you are sort of tuning your frequency to the same wavelength. And so that makes it easier for you to connect. And then that information comes in more strongly. But it is a practice, just like guitar or karate or whatever, cooking. It takes a little bit of work and effort. So yes, anyone can connect.
So what do you suggest for someone who maybe would like to connect to their loved one? Do you suggest just sitting in stillness first and picturing that person? Is that what do you tell people when they say to you, I would like to practice my intuitive abilities so that I'm able to connect to my loved ones on the other side?
Exactly what you just said. Stillness is so important. I think, though, that meditation has been given sort of people are like, oh, I can't meditate. So they don't even try, right? Because they've got this idea of what meditation is supposed to be like. And I think it's when people say, clear your mind. Well, we're humans and we can't fully clear our mind. That's not feasible, really. Even now, when I have a regular practice, I sit down and I'll think, did I load the dishwasher? Do I need to throw the clothes into the dryer? All of that stuff. And I'm like, okay, just give myself 10 minutes and all that can wait. That's normal. That's going to happen. And that doesn't mean you're not meditating. It just means that you're still in your brain waves are still more active and they haven't slowed down all the way yet. But sitting in stillness and allowing whatever comes through to come through. And if it's important, deal with it. If it's not, let it go for now. And write down any information that comes through. So let's say you're wanting to connect to your grandmother in spirit. Also, she doesn't have to be in spirit, okay? But if you want to connect to your grandmother and you just close your eyes, I like to imagine my grandmother. Then people always ask me, well, how do I know if I'm imagining it, if I'm making it up? I'm making it, but that's part of being human. The best part about being human is that we get to create and co-create our experiences here. And that is part of our imagination. Our imagination are our thoughts, and it allows us to build an experience that we want to have. So whenever you're starting with imagination to connect to someone, that's perfect because that's where you're creating an experience. And this is where spirit is like, oh, she's creating something. Universe, God, whatever you want to say, they're creating something. Let's help that flow to go there. We're going to create with that person. And so as you start to imagine your grandmother, you write down anything that comes through, movie lines, lyrics from a song, flashes of anything that you see in your head. My grandma was eating an apple. That was weird. Write it down. And as you practice this, you're going to find that your discernment becomes a lot stronger. Your ability to discern what is absolutely being created by you, and then what the start of your creation has now evolved into a connection. I write every single thing down, even though it's absurd. And if you did this 5 minutes every day for 2 weeks, you're going to figure out your discernment within those 2 weeks. You're going to understand what's coming through as a message and what's coming through as something that you're creating.
Yeah, I find that happened to me when I first started channeling messages. I would at first think, oh, I made that up. Like, where'd that come from? Just it's me making things up until I would work with people and then say what I was getting. And it's like, there's no way that I would have any of that kind of information or be able to make that up. So I think you just have to, in the beginning, trust the process.
Yes.
And know that it eventually does evolve and unfold. And you do know, like, okay, what am I getting and what's coming through and what's just kind of clutter that, our brains are still kind of turned on sometimes, as you said, like you've got those things running in the back of your mind. And then to me, the more you do it, the less that kind of stuff comes through anyway. It's like it's easier, I guess, to tap into the messages that I'm getting without all of the distraction from the background noise.
It's true. Now I hear my team in spirit, who I call A team, when when I'm going to channel their information and I'm writing it down. Usually I hear it come in with a quick, dear one or sweet one or young one or child. So when I hear that announcement, I know that I'm moving into the message. And so, but that has come with time. Absolutely.
I would love to know, like, what are some of the lessons that you've learned being a death doula that spirit has taught you? Just things that you've learned from being with people who are about to transition. Are there any lessons, any things you've learned from the other side?
Many things, actually. It's been just a beautiful ride. One thing I would like to share is oftentimes when a person is transitioning and they're in the process of actively dying, they are standing outside of their body before their last breath. And that can be, a lot of people don't recognize that as something that could happen. Maybe it goes against what they've been conditioned or what they've been taught. But in almost every single one of my experiences there's been a lot of people that I've helped to transition, they are standing outside their body before the final breath and observing from a distance. I didn't understand why at first. It was just an awareness that I had at the time. But after hearing stories of other people's NDEs, which are near-death experiences, and they say things like, "Oh, I was on the hospital ceiling while they were doing CPR." You don't have to be in your body for that moment of suffering. The pressure and the crushing of the ribs and the everything that comes with CPR that can be very traumatic. They didn't need to be in their body for that. So they removed their focus, right, to a different plane. And really that's all we're doing. When we die, we're not dying, or even we're not even going anywhere. We're just focusing elsewhere. So our body, while it's shutting down and going through its natural process of returning itself to the earth, the who we are, we hop out of it. It's like a vehicle. We hop out and we remain focused in a different way, in a different plane, and we watch. So that is one thing that I've learned. And another thing I've learned, which I touched on a little while ago, was that you don't have to be next to your loved one when they're transitioning in order to be a part of the dying process with them. You can be halfway across the world. It doesn't matter. And that's really important, because I think a lot of people feel like they have to rush to the bedside of a dying one, and they feel all this guilt when they don't make it in time.
Mm-hmm.
When the truth is, if the reason you want to be there is to support the other family, that's one thing. But if you're going there to support your loved one who is dying, you can do that from your bedroom, from your closet, from a car, anywhere you want. So that's another thing. And the third thing that I've learned that I think is important to mention is I was afraid early on when I first started doing this about a decade ago that one of my loved ones was a patient that I had. He had Mr. A. He'd been with me. I'd been his volunteer actually for 4 years. He was on hospice for 5 years. And I thought he was going to be transitioning, and I had to go. I had to leave, and I didn't want to leave him because I thought I didn't want to miss his last breath. And my team in spirit came through and they said, "Why don't you write him a love letter? Or why don't you make him a love letter?" And immediately I understood that it wasn't something I had to write. It was something that I could create. And so I imagined this love letter. I imagined the space that I knew he would love, because he showed me so many pictures from India, where he was from. And so I imagined this waterfall, and I imagined this lush greenery, all these things that he really, really liked. And I just held it there in my mind, and I don't know, filled it with all the love that I had for him. And I just said, okay, this is waiting in this moment in time and space for him. For when he transitions, he can receive that. Just that little, I don't know, moment that I created for him. And my team in spirit said that when they receive these love letters, when they receive them, it actually helps lift them up on the other side. And I don't know what that means. I still don't know what it means to be lifted up in some way and why it matters. But now I leave love letters to everyone I know, to people I see who look like, I know this sounds silly, but we have a lot of bicycle riders here in Central Texas, and there's some big hills. We're in the hill country, and if they look like they're struggling, I send them a love letter. I send it all the time. You could do it real quick in your head. So those are a few things that I've learned.
I love that. Well, we do. We need that uplifting too, don't we?
Yeah.
So were you always able to see spirit, or did that start after you became a death doula?
Always able to see spirit ever since I was little. I had a connection for as long as I can remember. I believe, though, that that's not necessary. You don't have to have it from an early age in order to develop that skill. And I do think it's a skill. I think it's a practice because we are all spirit and we can all connect to spirit. But after I started working as a death doula, my gifts or skills shifted a little bit. I now get ballparks on when people are going to die. And so I'll get an idea of someone's impending death. And I think it's not everybody. It's not like I'm walking through the grocery store and I'm like, this person's going to die. It's not like that. It's just
That would be a horrible thing to have to deal with every day, I would think,
I guess when I deal with, I do deal with death every day. And so it's not as horrible for me. It's such a beautiful process, but I think I get ballparks on people who I'm going to have a connection to, or if there's an opportunity for me to help them or their family. So it really, at first I thought, because I saw a vision of my dad's death and then I didn't tell anybody. And I thought, oh my God, was I supposed to stop it? Was I given that vision because I was supposed to do something about it? And no. And then my grandmother told me, if you ever get one on me, you better tell me. So I told her, and then it happened in the time frame in which I received. And I thought, okay, now by telling her, did we manifest it? Right. So I've been working through what that means. And so now my understanding is I only pick up someone's death when the soul has decided to die. So when on a soul level, someone has made that decision, I can read that wave of information, that little packet of information that kind of comes down over me. That is how it's nothing for me to change. There's nothing I could do to change it because I don't have that kind of power over someone else's choice to move on or not.
Right.
Right. So this has taken me a little bit of time to figure it out. But so after I decided to be a death doula, my gifts evolved into having a greater understanding of when someone is going to die. So I think I can help manage the family and the patient into closure, into peace, and into finding themselves and having a greater sense of understanding and awareness of their process.
If there are people out there listening who are maybe they're dealing with someone in their life who maybe has a terminal illness, or they know they're facing this, is there any advice that you could give to them that maybe might make the process just a little bit easier for them?
For the family who's going through the loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when I meet families, and it really is a case by case basis, but ultimately what you're hoping to give them and their loved one is peace. That's really what it comes down to, is a sense of everything is okay. So I would ask the family sort of what their goals were through this process. What is their intent behind how they want to serve their dying loved one? If someone is really angry because they feel this person's being taken away, that would be a different approach than, say, someone who's like, I don't know where to go. I just want them to be not in pain. So everyone's going to have a different way that they're moving through this grieving process. But if someone is really scared and angry that their loved one is being taken from them, those are the more complicated cases. And for those people who I would try to gauge how open-minded they are to maybe alternative methods, such as trying to connect on the soul level, would be something that might be a little alternative. And I would encourage them to start the practice now. Start connecting 10 minutes a day. And I would encourage them to look for a shared death experience or to allow themselves to be open to one. Not everyone's going to get them, but a shared death experience brings a lot of hope and closure for people who are struggling and they're very deep in their grief. Also, for families who are open to it, and you kind of have to navigate that a little gently, but I would certainly suggest, hey, in a few months, if you're open to it, I can send you a list of really amazing certified mediums who maybe you would be open to connecting to. You've got nothing to lose. Why not try it? That kind of thing. Because some people aren't open to that. But some people are to a point in their grief where they're willing to try anything to alleviate some of that pain. And the people who do it swear that they have more progress in one mediumship, 45-minute mediumship reading than they do in months of counseling. So counseling has its place. I don't want to dismiss that in any way, of course. But I think more people need to be open to certified mediums bringing in and making those connections with their dearly departed.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people just, after their loved one dies, there's so much guilt over what we should have done, should have said. But is that one of the things that you help people to do? It seems like you alluded to that maybe in the beginning when you were talking, that you help families facilitate maybe that closure that's needed so that there isn't the guilt when that loved one is gone, that they've already said what they've needed to say and tell those loved ones how they felt.
Yes, that's a big part of what I do, actually. And I work, it seems to be that the people who it's like they need to be the ones to give permission, it's the dying loved one. The one that's dying is the one that, if I can get them to initiate the closure, because people are afraid to burden the dying loved one. They're afraid to say something in their final moments, that could upset them in some way. But if the one who is dying is the first person to be vulnerable, the first person to open up and say what they need to say, it sort of cascades and everyone feels the need to say what they need to say in a beautiful way. There will always be tears. You can't avoid that, but you can soften the edges of grief if we can encourage, especially the dying loved one, to open up first.
And do you get messages from the people who've crossed over that, because I think so many people are afraid that their loved one holds on to anger and things like that. Have you experienced that after the loved one has crossed? Do they hold on to those grudges or things like that? Or is that simply a human thing that we need to understand, that once our loved ones have crossed over, there is no resentment? And I think people grapple with that.
So it's been my experience so far that when people transition and they remove the focus from the physical body into this bigger space, they have a greater understanding of how their actions affected other people and why people made choices that they did that they maybe felt victimized by. And that is dissolved. When people have an understanding of one another, grace enters into the picture and we don't hold on to that anymore. We love them so much. So it has been my experience so far that anger and hurt and resentment don't continue on because there's an awareness of why choices were made.
I love that. And that's how I've always felt too. I've always felt that it's the human in us that hold on to those negative emotions. And once we transition to the other side, we don't take that stuff with us. So I think that's very comforting for a lot of people to hear. Do you have any last words of wisdom that you might want to give someone who maybe is losing someone or has lost someone recently?
I would say, where would I begin? My heart goes out to you for sure. And there isn't anything that anyone can say in these moments to make things better. The only thing that could help are your own personal experiences around the dying process. And as you grieve, what you were able to do in those moments is really, really helpful when you look back on them. So know that you will get through them. And you want to be able to look back and have it fill you with joy and a sense of contentment that you did everything you could in that moment. So I would suggest anyone going through the process now to think about what your loved one needs and wants and what would be a beautiful send-off for them and make that happen. And that could be surrounding the person in pictures from their childhood or memories, playing their favorite music, opening a window and letting fresh air in, bringing their pets in to say goodbye, allowing them to say goodbye to as many people as possible, including FaceTime or a phone call, even if they're out of it. Hearing is the last sense to go. Another thing would be some people really like cats on here. Some people really like to do like sort of a cleansing of their loved one, their hands and their feet. You could do that with water and essential oils. It's any way that you can offer care. And all of those things are calming. I always suggest too that to allow yourself to cry and to not hold back, feeling like you need to be the strong one, the rock, holding it all together, because that's not helpful for anyone, including yourself, actually. And when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, it actually makes everybody else be vulnerable too. And so you're opening up a doorway for someone to potentially say what they need to say. So I would say all of those things.
I love that. So tell us a little bit more about your book, because you have this book, Healing Whispers from Spirit Guides. What do you talk about in your book?
So the book talks briefly an introduction about my own childhood experiences, but then I have a chapter dedicated to things that I've learned. For example, things that I've learned through the dying process, things that I've learned from spirit, things that I've learned through my team in spirit. And then I follow it up with a corresponding patient story. These amazing stories of these incredible people and their journeys toward death and how beautiful it is. And the shared death experiences that I've had with many of them. And then again, another thing that I've learned, followed by another patient story. So that kind of goes throughout that way. I end every single chapter with a channeled message from a team.
Nice. So if anyone's out there and they're interested in grabbing a copy of your book, or maybe they want to work with you or follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my book is available on barnesandnobles.com and on Amazon, and it's in Kindle, paperback, and audiobook for those of you, if you're like me, who like to read when you're running errands. Um, Also, you can go to my website, www.helengretchenjones.com, and there will take you to the book and also services that I offer and things like that.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much, first of all, for the work that you do, because I think it is really super important and you're helping and touching so many lives and doing what you're doing, but also for being here with us today and sharing your story. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
And I want to thank all of you guys for being here with us today, too. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. Please leave a positive review from wherever you're listening. And of course, the greatest compliment you can pay is to share this podcast with anyone you think might benefit. I hope that you guys have an amazing week. I'm sending you so much love and light, and I will talk to you soon. Bye, guys.